Welcome to Potter Visited, Episode 3.
This chapter, titled either Local Man Hates Mail or Vernon Dursley in Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds.
What is the real chapter?
It's called Letters from No One. Counteroffer, my titles are better. Not saying I could improve the Harry Potter books, because I couldn't, but I could clearly improve at least one or two chapter titles.
Well, you got Tori.
Oh yeah. This is Shay.
Diving into the third chapter in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone.
Not to be confused with Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone.
We are not Americans, we are Canadians.
You're welcome. Sorry, America.
I mean, America's going through a hard time.
They've seen some things.
It's been rough, but
you guys will be alright. You'll get through this.
They got a new president. Hopefully things can work out a bit.
They're just a few pairs of Bernie mittens away from happiness, I'm sure.
Important question is, what tea are you drinking?
Well, I'm having orange pico again, because once again, I'm at it with my Fudgio cookies.
I'm also having orange pico. Very steep because I got talking with my roommate and I forgot I was making tea.
The amount of teacups and saucers I have sitting around my apartment in different places because I made a pot of tea, poured myself a cup, put it down, did something, forgot I'd already poured my cup of tea, poured another cup of tea. It's actually embarrassing.
I'm really bad for making tea, forgetting I was gonna make tea and then just having really oversteeped tea, but still drink it because can't waste tea.
Because tea is life.
Alright, starting off here, we have some light topics, and I just wanted to highlight the beginning of Sassy Harry, which is something the fandom really enjoys, because I feel like the movies didn't capture just how sassy and just these zingers Harry delivers in all of these books.
Yeah, they kind of made him a little bit more bland in the movies. There's a little bit of extra razzle dazzle in Book Harry that's just very nice.
When he tells Dudley, the poor toilet's never had anything as horrible as your head down it. It might get sick.
That's a good one. They really do remove a lot of Harry's best lines in the movies.
Yeah, he's so sarcastic. I get that Harry has a lot going on, but I think it makes him more like a kid, and he's more relatable that way because his cousin's being mean to him, and he's just being this sarcastic 11-year-old. I think we can all relate to that, especially growing up with siblings and stuff. You're always throwing out one-liners or being a brat. So I just feel he has some really great one-liners in this chapter, and then going through, I definitely want to keep track of just Harry just being his sassy self and just wishing which ones could actually be in the movie. I feel Dan Rad did a really good job, but maybe they could have included some more sassy Harry in it, but I don't know. Maybe Harry was just too sassy for the movies.
I think maybe it's almost like they thought to make Harry more relatable so that every child reading it could relate, they thought they'd remove away some of his more distinct personality traits, so he was more of an empty slate for people to project themselves onto, because maybe not all kids are sarcastic, so we relate more to the sarcastic Harry because that's who we are, but they were whitewashing him into a more sort of generic outline so that everyone can project themselves on it.
I mean, for the main character in the series, Harry isn't usually someone's favorite character. When you ask someone oh, what's your favorite character from Harry Potter, no one really says, oh, Harry Potter.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, he's great. He's fantastic. I think part of why he's not a lot of people's favorite character who've seen the movies is that they took a lot of, he doesn't have a huge, interesting personality, really. But Harry doesn't really have time to lean on personality because he has to do so much. He's always doing things. So even though it's his monologue that you don't get to spend as much time just dealing with his personality, kind of. The fun quirks.
I just feel with this kind of series, there's so many characters. So when you think of Harry Potter, well, obviously I like Harry because it's about him. But when you think of your favorite character, it just feels kind of boring to say Harry. I feel for kids, a lot of people say Harry because you're a kid and that's the main character, and it's usually who kids, when they read the books, that's who they identify with. But when you're older, you're there's so many cool characters in Harry Potter. Why would I say Harry Potter?
I think people also generally choose a character that they can kind of relate to in some way, and because Harry's the big deal, Harry's the hero, Harry's the savior, it's kind of hard to see yourself in that sometimes, as much to outwardly say that. More so than saying well, I can relate to Ron because I'm goofy and I have friends who are really great and accomplished and I know what it's like to have sibling rivalries, and it's sort of easier to publicly say you can relate to characters that aren't Harry Potter, I can relate to him because I too am the last hope for this world to survive and overcome the evil. It's me.
I knew it.
Relatable. As a child though, Snape was my favorite character, even as a kid. I remember my 6th grade teacher, and she loved the Harry Potter books, and she asked me who my favorite character one day was, and I was like, my favorite character is Snape, and she's like, really? And I was like, yep.
Yeah, that's probably like what you're not expecting, because I had that teacher too, and I'm a year older than you, so like I also read the Harry Potter books when I was in the 6th grade, so like I probably had like the most basic answer, like Hermione or like whatever, and then she just gets this kid being like, oh, Snape's your character. You're like, what?
Definitely. Yeah, they really just sort of divided up like traits and handed them out individually to each of the characters. They're like, okay, we're gonna let Hermione be smart and Ron be funny and Harry be heroic. And that's enough. That's all they need. And it's kind of like, no.
Yeah. It's a very, like, movie formula stuff, which, if we ever discuss the movie in future episodes, I can get into whole movie formulas and stuff like that.
It just feels like they neglected the fact that, like, each of the trio have sprinklings of all of those traits into them, and it's just easier to... You don't have time for the nuances, I guess, in film that you have in the book. So they just sort of decided to assign those traits specifically to one character each, which is sad. It's kind of a disservice because it makes Hermione seem less than, because she's just the smart one who knows all of the things, and makes Ron less.
Yeah, and they kind of take away a lot of Hermione's flaws. Like, we can get into this for when we discuss the films more, but there's definitely, like, looking back at the films now, they definitely made Hermione more of like a super character, where she was this really smart, really like heroic character, and like a really, I think they wanted her to be like this like character for girls to look up to. But the thing about Hermione is like she's a great character and role model, but she's also a flawed character, and that's what makes her such a great character, especially as like my favorite character. And then in a disservice to Ron, they kind of ruined his character because a lot of Ron's like lines or characteristics from the novels are given to Hermione in the movies, and then Ron's just like this side character that doesn't really do too much. Just really unfortunate.
Yeah, I know a lot of that part of that was that one of the earlier directors said to the author that his favorite character was Hermione. And so I think maybe they played a little bit of favorites as the director to sort of give more positives to Hermione.
Yeah, I wonder how much favoritism, because I also had this feeling, like, I don't know if this is accurate, but the screenwriter for the Harry Potter series, apparently I've heard just like TikTok conspiracy theories that he was very into the idea of Harry and Hermione.
Ew.
So that's why there was a lot of Harry and Hermione moments in the movie, because he was really into it. And it just kind of makes sense looking back at it, because there's just like things that don't need to be there, that I'm like, I get that Dan and Emma have great chemistry and they rolled with it, but I was just like, this makes a lot of sense.
Not all chemistry needs to be romantic chemistry, you know, just because people act well together and they interact well.
Like, looking back at that weird Harry and Hermione dance in the like Deathly Hallows, like that was just, I get that it was supposed to be like this really like heartwarming like moment and stuff, but it just felt so weird to me.
It's one of those things that to me just seems like a waste of film time. Like, there's so many other good things in the books that they could have included, and they wasted that much time to have this unnecessary moment that just...
Especially in the last movie. But it could also be a reason why Harry and Ginny were written so poorly. Like, I know that Bonnie and Dan didn't have great chemistry, but they couldn't, like, control that because they were kids and they were casted. But I'm like, the writing for Ginny, especially, was terrible. And I'm just like... Did he sabotage it on purpose?
Oh my gosh, I hope not. That'd be very upsetting.
I got deep into some TikTok conspiracies.
But yeah, they really did. It's kind of like if the actors Daniel Radcliffe and Bonnie Wright had more chemistry, it would be okay that there wasn't even a lot of scenes of them just having good conversations, because there'd be that in the air anyway. But because they didn't have that chemistry, they needed to have really good dialogue, and it was so distinctly absent that they had awkward moments like the shoe tying scene where they're not saying anything. And I'm like, that's a weird enough thing to do as is.
Yeah, that was, especially Ginny's character in general in the movies was terrible.
But it's very unlike Ginny, who's like the strong, independent woman, to like bend down and tie the shoe of a person who's fully capable of it. And also it's like, no, small, little, quiet, physical things like that work if there's steaming chemistry. When there isn't some If there isn't any chemistry.
Yeah, you can't rely on those kind of moments if there's not, the chemistry's not there. Like, it has
Yeah.
to be, like, the writing and, like, the way things are captured. And it was just, that's probably one of the reasons why I don't like Half-Blood Prince movie, because the romance between Harry and Ginny is just so painful, and I loved the romance in the book so much. Like, the way Harry realizes that he has a thing for Ginny in the books, it's, like, one of my favorite parts of that book, besides, like, all the other great stuff. But, like, the movie, like, ruined that for me, and then also, it was also kind of a terrible movie. So.
Yeah. It was my favorite book. I hated the sixth. I mean, I still watch the sixth movie because there's lots of things I like in it, but it was a complete disservice to the novel. But I think for sure, good writing for interactions between Ginny and Harry in the movie could have saved how the relationship is portrayed, and it was not there, and they did not put in the effort that needed to be put in to make it happen. So I 0% blame the actors for this. You know what I mean? They tried their best, and good dialogue could have saved it, and they didn't write their dialogue.
Yeah, they can only do what they're given with, and they weren't given anything great.
Interviews with Bonnie Wright, and I realized how much more like Ginny she is than movie Ginny. Like, she could have been herself and done that role more justice than what they clearly directed her to do. So it just seems like the entire production crew had a misunderstanding of what Ginny Weasley is, or who Ginny Weasley is.
Yeah, that's why Ginny was so ruined in movies.
Because she's so fantastic, and she comes across... She's so, underrated for people who only pay attention to the movies, kind of, because of how they treat her. But she's actually such an absolute badass. She should be so many more people's favorite character or most relatable character. But she just never gets that treatment for people who haven't read the books.
Yeah. Justice for Ginny. Hopefully if they ever remake the series in, 50 years, they actually do Ginny right. Alright, moving on from movie discussion. What else did we have? Oh, yeah. So Vernon's acting a little bit cuckoo.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that as a person who spends so much of his time trying to appear normal and stable and boring and consistent, he becomes the opposite of all of those things in this chapter. He becomes rash-minded and irrational and spontaneous in a bad way, and it's just, there's no logic, there's no consistency.
I always notice he gives Dudley and Petunia kind of harsh word before, Dudley's his spoiled kid, and they usually work around whatever Dudley wants, but then he kind of tells Dudley, no, we're doing this, we're leaving, you just, you need to listen to me, and he's, it's probably one of the first times he's very, harsh, or just kind of, you need to listen to me to his wife and kid, and it's, a change from, probably for Dudley, because has had his parents run his finger for his whole life, and then all of a sudden now, his parents are nope, we're in charge now.
He loses his noodles, and it's just what is his long-term goal? What is, I'm gonna nail shut my mailbox. Okay, great. Now it's coming in the fireplace. Well, I'll nail up the fireplace. That's not a practical way to live your life long-term. It feels like he's very short-term goals in this chapter, and, it's just not practical. I get it that it's heat of the moment and he's frantic, but, I need to know what his plan is. I need to understand what things he's doing now he thinks will actually help him in the long run, because none of them seem practical. How is he going to pay his bills if the mail slot's blocked? The power will go out. The heat will turn off.
Yeah, he's definitely just thinking of short-term goals, because the long-term goal is that he doesn't want Harry to find out about that he's a wizard or to go to Hogwarts. So he's just thinking of things so he can't get that letter. So it's everything. So Harry cannot get that letter, but it's all these things that don't really make sense.
Yeah, he just loses his noodles. I also think it's interesting that after the arrival of the first letter, Vernon moves Harry out of the cupboard and into the spare bedroom. And I always wondered whether or not that was him thinking, oh, well, because it was addressed to the cupboard under the stairs, if he's not in there, they won't be able to find him. Or if he thought, they know I'm keeping a child in a closet. I don't want the wizard child support workers to show up and arrest me, so I'll put him in a bedroom so I don't look like I'm engaging in child abuse. What exactly was his motivation?
Yeah. What's going on with who was ever addressing these letters? Because they're oh, Harry Potter lives in a closet, that's normal. I'm what? Someone literally had to put the address on there, unless it's a spell or something, but someone...
Yeah, I always thought it was a quick notes quill type situation where they say send it to Harry Potter, and it magically, because of, I don't know, magic traces and whatnot, knows exactly where he is.
Someone should have done their due diligence. Like, this kid's living in a closet, and then everyone's like, yeah, that's normal, that's fine.
Casual, like, maybe they think it's like cute muggle slang. Like, oh, closet is just what you call a cute, kitschy bedroom with a window seat or something. Who knows?
Oh, God.
Who knows? You know, muggles and their weird slang for rooms.
Yeah, you have a point here. If a muggle commits a crime against a wizard, is it tried in muggle court or wizard court?
Right? I mean, like, think about it. Like, child abuse has got to be a crime in the wizarding world, too. So, if they'd actually decided to prosecute, would Vernon Dursley be charged under, like, would the wizard police, would the Auras report him through channels to the Muggle police, and the Muggle police would arrest him and put him in Muggle jail for child abuse?
I guess.
Or would it be because he was abusing a wizard, would he go to Azkaban? Like,
I feel like they had to keep him in the Muggle world because they don't want him to really know much about the wizarding world. I just feel like maybe the wizards would influence his trial and, like, Muggle court, maybe. I don't know.
yeah, it's an interesting, it was a random question that sort of popped into my head. The idea of, like, Vernon Dursley and, like, the Ministry of Magic in front of the Wismagot. Just being like, you foolish people in your silly robes. I'm allowed to abuse my nephew.
And Dursley in, like, any wizarding setting would be so funny.
What do you think would be the funniest wizarding setting for Vernon Dursley?
I always like to see Hogwarts as, like, a normal school that had parent-teacher conferences.
Oh my goodness.
And just, like, them having to have a conference with, like, his teachers.
I kind of think it would be funny to have Vernon Dursley casually there in some of the more serious, intense moments, just to see how he'd react to, like, in the fourth book when Voldemort's got Harry in the graveyard and he's, like, poking him and taking his blood. Like, just Vernon Dursley there, like, this wizarding hogwash. Like, how did I get here? Take that, Harry.
Oh, Vernon Dursley.
Like, not knowing whether or not he wants Harry to be in pain or he wants the strange noseless man to not be happy. Like, just the internal struggles.
Vernon's just a simple man with a simple job, with a simple life.
Or flushing himself into the Ministry of Magic. That would probably be grand.
Oh, God. Well, I don't. Why would he even put his feet in the toilet?
Yeah, Vernon is. It is funny to picture characters. It's also funny to put Arthur Weasley in Muggle situations. I mean, we've seen him take the train, but, like, it's always funny to take people completely out of their own worlds and imagine them. Like, imagine Arthur Weasley at Walmart. Just for a minute. Just imagine.
It'd be so crazy.
Or IKEA.
Oh my God, IKEA. IKEA is just, like, an experience in itself.
The Muggle version of the Tri-Wizard Tournament definitely involves getting out of a maze that's actually just an IKEA. We should really think about what the other two tasks would be in the Muggling Tri-Wizard Cup. Tri-Muggle Cup.
Well, getting out of IKEA.
Probably, like, calling your bank about anything. Just to have to call the bank, be on hold, get put through to someone. Like, that's got to be part of it.
It should be taking the subway at rush hour in Toronto, because that is a challenge in itself.
Yeah, or in Montreal when you're not entirely fluent in French and the metro gets stuck in the tunnel and they only tell you what's going on in French, but you can't really hear the voice anyway, so even if you are fluent in French, you have no idea what's happening. Yeah, I was wondering how many unreceived letters should they be sending to someone before they actually send a member of the Hogwarts staff? Because I did a wee calculation, and I counted he gets 1 letter to the cupboard, 1 letter to the smallest bedroom, then he gets 3 more letters, then 12 more letters, then he gets 24 letters, then he gets 30 or 40 letters, and then he gets about 100 when he's at the hotel, which now I have to do math, but that's like 170 something. So
yeah, that's pretty crazy, because you think of, like, your bank or just kind of, like, other, like, important letters, they usually send 3 letters or something, and then it's kind of like calling you or trying to get in touch with you.
Yeah, now the government's after you for tax evasion.
Yeah, something like that. I'm just wondering, like, I know that, like, you know, Hermione said that when she got her letter that, like, McGonagall came to her house to explain it to her parents, and I just figured, like, Harry was raised by Muggles, so, like, why didn't they send a teacher there? Because, like, I know he's not a Muggle, but he was raised by Muggles, so, like, if they thought his aunt and uncle weren't completely batshit crazy and, like, were normal parents, like, wouldn't they have to explain it to them too? Like, Dumbledore just expected a lot from the Dursleys when I think that they gave no reason for him to expect so much from them. Like,
I mean, yeah, honestly, why Dumbledore? Why?
Another why Dumbledore moment. It's just like that's just about everything in the series. It's just why Dumbledore, like, smartest man in the world apparently, but Dumbledore either doesn't, like, see Harry as this actual person. It's just this thing that he needs to get from one place to another. But it's just like there are real variables to, like, think about
Yeah, Dumbledore's
here for this living, breathing human.
he's really good at anticipating things that are going to happen and preparing for them. If something out of the blue comes up, he's not the best at reacting to it, I guess. It's like his forethought is his strength, and if he can't plan for it, he's like, I won't consider it at all. Everything will go exactly as I intended.
Yeah, what do you think Dumbledore was doing when he wasn't responding to the letters, or like that he found out that he was moving around, and Dumbledore's like, oh well, like, oh, maybe he just hasn't like opened it. Like, does he actually think the Dursleys are like withholding it? Or, like, what's Dumbledore thinking right now?
I feel like the first few letters, he's like, owls these days, you know? It's just like, blame owls.
Yeah.
As one blames FedEx or Amazon.
Or maybe he just thought, like, oh, the Dursleys aren't letting him open them, so I'll just send 100 letters.
I think after, like, 5, he sends one to Petunia that's like, hey, Petunia, it's that scary magic man.
Hey, bitch, you better let him open this.
It's I, the big scary magic man, just reminding you to let Harry have his letter. Sincerely, the big scary magic man. Like, you know, slightly threatening reminder that he still exists and is big and scary.
We had a no name drop, which is Aunt Marge, because I like keeping track of who we hear about before we actually meet. So we won't meet Aunt Marge until book 3, but we get to hear about Aunt Marge.
I hate her.
Yeah, and Aunt Marge is the worst.
Absolute worst.
You think Vernon's bad?
I mean, okay, there's slightly worse people than Aunt Marge, but man, do I hate her.
Yeah, I think everyone has like family members that they really don't like, and you just kind of like have to put up with them because it's your family, it's your blood, and you're like, no, they're an asshole. Jumping into our next discussion, we have communication in the wizarding world. This is definitely something that could be talked about in depth more, but I just have noticed that they don't seem to have, in the Harry Potter series, like, everything is so far back in time. Like, I think the series is supposed to take place in the 90s. So we have, like, Dudley having computer games and the computers and stuff, but the wizards still rely on mail. Like, they write everything with quill and ink. There's no technology. In fact, technology doesn't even work at Hogwarts. So I was just like, even though it's placed in the 90s, wizard communication's still stuck in like the 1800s or something. Like they still use quill and ink. They still like write letters when like I'm pretty sure the internet and email was available then.
Yeah, I remember my like early school years. Like I remember when I got my first cell phone, you know? As a kid, like having a cell phone, a pay-as-you-go pink Motorola Razr.
Like I remember getting email in like the 2000s, and I get this place like in the 90s, but like I get that probably having like technology is just kind of like a hindrance for the plot and stuff, so like that's why it's easier to be set in the wizarding world where like things can happen easier for the plot without like technology and everything.
I also think that for like a secret-keeping perspective of it, like trying to keep the wizarding world secret, if wizard kids had emails and they could go on Omegle or Twitter or something, imagine like just the things they would say.
I'm not saying that they have internet. I would just be saying like that they have their own version of stuff. Like they have their own version of the wireless, which is basically a radio. Like they have their own versions of stuff. But I just feel like it's very like stuck. Like who wants to write an essay by hand with quill and ink?
I would rather write anything by hand than have to type it. But,
oh really?
Oh my god.
I can type way faster than I can, like, I have this problem where I think faster than I can write, so when I type, I can actually, like, kind of think faster enough.
Oh god, no. I think so much faster when I have a pen in my hand. They're very behind. I think part of it also because they block out technology from working at Hogwarts, so I think that's part of their intentions of making sure that, like, the Muggleborns and the Half-Bloods don't bring technology to Hogwarts and introduce it to all the purebloods and...
Yeah. Well, could you imagine, like, having, like, a cool, like, your, like, Nintendo Switch or something and being excited to, like, use it, and you go to Hogwarts and you can't use it, and you're like, just imagine these 21st century Muggleborns, and they go to Hogwarts and things don't work, and it's just like, there's no Wi-Fi here? What?
I remember when we were in high school at one point, someone started a Twitter account for our school. And it was just ridiculous, dumb things people overheard. But imagine, like, the Hogwarts overheard at Twitter. I mean, it would be wild.
That'd be funny. Someone should start a Twitter account called that, Overheard at Hogwarts.
I don't have time, I'm busy. I'm busy!
Might already exist, to be honest.
Overheard at Hogwarts probably exists. I would love that, Overheard at Hogwarts account that all the kids are reading, and the teachers don't know about it, and it's like overheard at Hogwarts, Professor McGonagall making fun of Snape's hair. I don't know. Like, just beautiful stuff, glorious things, you know.
Yeah, I just find that they did make some stuff that was kind of like a replacement for stuff like those like kind of two-way mirrors. It's kind of like FaceTime, but it's like funny. I just feel like the communication sometimes it's just like is letters really the best you can do? Like there's magic.
I made a list of all of the like wizarding communications. So they've got owls, which to me is just like snail mail. It's like sending something in the mail. And then they've got flu chat, which they don't really talk about because there's the flu network that you use to travel. And then there's the Sirius Black method of sticking your face in the flames and talking to people through fire, which
seems so uncomfortable, but I mean,
that's a thing. So I guess that's kind of like Skype. And then at the ministry, they've got those little paper airplanes, which I think is fun. I think that's a good one. And I know some of the students do that, passing notes in class. At least I saw it in one of the movies. So that's kind of cute. Paintings are kind of a method of communication. Like, hey, painting of this person, go tell your other paintings. You know, like, jump to your other painting and tell everyone there what's going on. But that's a weird method of communication because you're talking to someone that was painted and that person might decide not to do that. Then there's Dudley's Muggle technology, which isn't used at all really by the wizards. Oh, and then mirror shards, you know, vaguely given to people as gifts and not fully explained. It's like if you downloaded Zoom, but all of the instructions were in Russian.
Yeah, of course. Another form of communication is Patronuses, specifically, I don't know what it's called in the book. Is it Protein Patronus? The Patronus where they can make it talk. Apparently it's very difficult, but I believe Dumbledore and the Order of the Phoenix use them to communicate with each other. So that's kind of like, I don't know if it'd be like, it was not quite FaceTime, but it's kind of like a video message, I guess. Maybe it's like Snapchat.
It's a weird use of a Patronus, I find. Like, what we know about Patronuses and what we learn about Patronus logically, like, this is how they work for defense. They can, like, guide you through the darkness. That's great. This whole using them, like, having your voice projected from them seems so off book from what they're actually meant to be.
Yeah, I wonder if the author just needed a way for them to communicate that was, like, different. Because I feel like we get a different form of communication and travel. Like, every book there's something new. But I feel like she just needed a way for them to communicate. So I don't know if it really makes sense for, like, what Patronuses are used for. Because we are introduced as Patronuses in the third book where they're repelling Dementors and, like, they're protectors from dark magic. But I think it's in the fifth book it's first introduced, where it's like that's how you can communicate. So it's just like a complete different side to this one thing, and it's kind of like completely different from like its intention.
I wonder if maybe spells evolve in the wizarding world in a similar way that like technologies will evolve in the Muggle world. So like for us, phones originally existed to call people, and so that's sort of like what the original purpose of the Patronus was, to protect. And then for people's convenience, they added on other things. Like now we can also take pictures with our phones, and there's a calculator on our phones. So maybe in the wizarding world, creative people are always kind of finding new ways to use spells or adding things to traditional spells in order to make them more versatile.
I think the explanation we get is that Dumbledore did it, but I don't know if that's 100% true. If he like kind of figured out how to get the Patronuses to talk, because I know it was told to us as it was a thing for Dumbledore's or the Phoenix to communicate secretly. So we know eventually they'll do it.
It just, I mean, it's interesting. I highly doubt Dumbledore came up with it.
Took credit for it.
Feels like he doesn't have enough time to be like developing fun new spells. Like, someone Dumbledore knew came up with it, and then he used it.
Well, I mean, maybe he could have time because he ignores basically all his responsibilities.
Honestly, it was probably Snape. But when it comes to, like, inventing new spells and being creative, it's too old to have been the Weasley twins thing. So it was probably a Snape invented it, and then Dumbledore was like, look what I invented.
He's like, McGonagall will deal with the school stuff. I'm just going to sit in my office and neglect Harry and invent a new spell.
I wonder if there's such thing as like Dumbledore loyalists. Like if there are people out there who would hear this and be really, really mad. Like, how dare you blasphemize Albus Dumbledore?
Yeah, I'm wondering because we've just been rigging on Dumbledore for like the past like 3 episodes. I'm wondering if there's any like Dumbledore fans, because I think for me at least, with the people I follow in like the fandom and stuff, I'm like, everyone's pretty much like Dumbledore was a manipulator, and that's the general kind of feelings, I think, for most of the fandom. I think people still like Dumbledore as a character, but I definitely don't think it's like...
Yeah, okay. Well, if you're out there and you're a huge Dumbledore fan...
Like, you know how there's like people that hate Snape, like me, and there's people that love Snape like you, and it's a very split in the fandom. But I don't think Dumbledore's like that.
Okay, interesting. I mean, I gotta think some people love Dumbledore. Like, maybe some of the younger readers who, like...
Well, yeah, I'm assuming if you're younger, because you don't know.
Don't look that into, like, manipulation and stuff and just think he's fun and goofy. But they shouldn't listen to our podcast, because I swear a lot. I think what else we could talk about that fits into communication. Maybe not communication technologies. Maybe we can expand on, like, the communication abilities of the characters we've met so far.
Very true, yeah.
Like, for example, Dumbledore is the worst communicator. He always leaves important information out and gives odd riddle answers that are not helpful, which is not effective communication whatsoever.
No, it's not.
Yeah, it's not at all. And then it kind of seems like the Weasleys each have very unique communication methods, and I think that's probably because they always have to, like, fight.
Well, yeah, it's very cool. The Weasleys have that clock. I wonder if all families have kind of like their own way of communicating within each other.
I'm sure they do. Like, some families are really sarcastic, some make fun of each other a lot, some share all the intimate details of their lives and personal lives with each other, some don't. Some families are more formal, even with each other. Some are completely informal. Some families swear in front of their parents. Some people couldn't imagine swearing or having their parents ever know they have sworn. I think there's definitely unique communication skills. I think it's interesting how different members of the Weasleys families have their own unique communication method, and, like, how you can look at their family dynamics to interpret that. Like, Ginny is really bold, and she says what she thinks and she says what she means, and that's probably from being the youngest in a huge family.
And probably like the only girl as well.
Yeah, she had to speak louder to be heard, kind of, and she had to they made fun of her so much for being a girl when she was younger that she had to really develop certain boldness and, like, internal strength in her own convictions, just in order to, like, get through being in that family. And same with the twins, I think, sort of. They also are loud and boisterous and are a lot, because I think if they weren't a lot, they would have gotten sort of lost in that family. So they had to be that much just to be noticed.
It's also very interesting that we know Percy, the way, Percy's a very, like, prompt and, like, person, but he always is, like, overly polite, and, like he addresses him as mother and father, and he's always very prim and proper that way. And I was just kind of like, it's so interesting for him compared to all the other kids, because none of the other kids call him that.
I think he has a formality that the others don't, and I think that probably has to do with his ambitions. I feel like he sees the people who are successful in, like, business and professional as being part of, like, higher class society, and he thinks that that is probably how they talk and how they address the people in their families, and he probably tries to absorb that and sort of make that his norm. Which, again, makes sense for Percy, especially being, like, the third child and having Bill and Charlie have gone first.
I do think there is some parentification going on. We always see Molly and Arthur as, like, the best parents of this big family, but it's a lot of kids. So, like, 'cause we know Ron has a lot of insecurities, but where he fits in his family and the attention that he probably wanted, but he couldn't get. So I feel like Percy, as, like, the third oldest, he had a lot of he felt either he was given a lot of responsibility for his younger siblings, especially because he came before the twins, and I feel like the twins were, like, a lot, as, like, going from, like, 3 to 5. But I also feel like he kind of took it on, because we know that Percy kind of, like, tries to, like, keep, like, he kind of butts into Ron and Ginny's business, and he's always, like, trying to keep them in line. But I feel like he was kind of, like, either not really given that role, but felt like he needed to take that role on to be responsible for the family. And I feel like that maybe had led to him having some internal resentment, which kind of came to head in the 5th book when he ends up leaving his family.
Yeah, I definitely think that each of the kids developed a lot of their strengths and their weaknesses from existing in a family of so many kids and trying to get their time or the attention or whatever it is that they needed in a family that really only had so much. I mean, they're great parents, the Weasleys, obviously. They're the...
I'll have to talk about this more in depth when we get to the Weasleys, but I always wondered, it's kind of like a thing, like, we know Arthur and Molly had all these kids, so I don't know what birth control is in the Wizarding World, because who knows, but
I assume there's gotta be a spell for that. Like, or a potion. There's no way there's not a potion for that, you know? Like, I feel like...
You'd hope. I mean, I can't imagine wanting to have 6 kids for reals, but that's just me.
I can't imagine wanting to have any kids.
Maybe Molly wanted Yeah, maybe Molly wanted to have 6 kids, but I'm like, is it like personally like right for Arthur? Because we know Arthur is like this really great wizard, and he could do like more in the ministry, have a higher up job, have a better pay, but he chooses not to because he likes where he is. I love Arthur, and I totally get like doing what you want to do in your career, but I was like, is it right for him not to do that for the sake of his kids? Because we know that like they're barely scraping by at certain points in the book, and we know Percy brings up the fact that he had to put up with less because his father didn't have ambitions and wasn't like willing to do what was necessary for the family.
Yeah, it definitely feels like Arthur maybe could have accepted promotions and been providing more financially for his family. I don't know anything about those positions though, so maybe like they offered him different jobs, but they also involved more hours at the office as well, and maybe he decided that he'd rather provide more like emotional support and love to his family than financial support, which is like a good choice. And I'm not saying money's more important than emotional support, but maybe there's a somewhere in between that Arthur could have reached.
Yeah, I'm just assuming that the Wizarding World is also a capitalist society, so that's also where this comes from, because I'm thinking of like the real world where like you would obviously not want to have kids if you couldn't afford them, and it's kind of like that thing, like, do you do what you love or do you do what's necessary?
I wonder if, like, to me, there's no way that family planning isn't a thing that exists in the Wizarding World. Like, I'm sure they have means of protecting themselves from having unwanted children. I just kind of see the Weasleys as the kind of family that might just like take what life gives them. Like, they love all of their children, so maybe they don't intentionally want more kids, but they know they'll love a kid if they have it, so they just kind of, which like is a choice. Maybe they just chose to like leave it up to fate and say like whatever happens is what should happen, I guess. But also it's interesting because I feel like some of the pureblood families should be having more kids. Like, to me, not so much the Weasleys, but the elitist, stuck-up, racist purebloods should be having as many kids as they can so that every family has more pureblood spouse options for their children. So I wonder if, like, the wizards have ways to, like, not have kids, but they don't have ways to increase the likelihood of having kids, because I can't imagine the Malfoys choosing to only have one son, as much as they, like, spoiled him and loved him or whatever. I think that if you're gonna believe that, like, purebloods are the best and they should only marry other purebloods, then, like, you should be expected to have a boatload of children, I guess.
Yeah. You think it would be like that, kind of like in, like, historical times where, like, the royals wanted as much kids as possible because they wanted as much heirs as possible.
An heir, a spare to the heir, a couple to marry off so that your wealth can grow in foreign countries, and yeah, it just seems like the Weasleys are doing what elitist purebloods should be doing.
Yeah, and they're seen as, like, trashy because they have all these kids, and obviously they're a lot more, like, poorer. But, like, the Malfoys are seen as, like, better because they just have one son, which is, like, that, like,
counterproductive to their goals.
That's only one pureblood compared to their, like, 7 purebloods, or 6, or how many kids they have.
It's 7. It's always 7, right? It's Bill, Charlie, Percy,
so many.
Fred, George, Ron.
Yeah, it is 7. I think I'm counting the twins as one person.
They are not the same person.
Well, that seems to be it for us. For now, we will be back to discuss Chapter 4 of Philosopher's Stone, The Keeper of the Keys. If you have any thoughts on today's episode or would like to share your thoughts or theories on future chapters of Philosopher's Stone, feel free to email us at potterrevisitedpodcast@gmail.com. You can also reach us across social media at Potter Revisited. Thank you for listening and see you next time. Bye!